Very well, let's go ahead and begin our study this morning. And as you can see, the title of our study is going to be God's Voice Today. And we have this image, this meme with different activities, different things that are taking place in each one of these little squares. There is something that this picture is telling us, not exactly what we see in those words in the center, but it's even deeper than that. Okay. It is deeper than that. And so I found this image on Facebook some time ago, um, and it really caught my attention because it is speaking. It is speaking very loudly to us. Um, and so I'd like to present this slide as the question. How is God speaking to us through this image? This is what we're going to answer at the end of the study. But we're going to look at this through some quotations. This is going to be the very beginning of our study on this topic by looking at the spirit of prophecy. And I was going to go about this a whole different way, but when Brother Dean presented last Sabbath, he was actually able to show me something through his study. Um, and this is how God arranged it, I believe. This is providential. And so, with that said, keep this image in mind. I don't think we're going to be able to go through everything today. We'll probably end up into two separate presentations, part one and part two. But at the very get into how this image is actually God's voice today. But I ask that you come up with that conclusion to see if God uh, is able to confirm your thoughts on this. Some of you I know uh, that have been through my presentations that will be able to see it, and I'd ask that keep that information, um, and so we shall see as we continue. But notice our first slide. May God help us. And so this is God speaking to us through the spirit of prophecy. Notice what God says. May God help you to receive the words that I have spoken. Let those who stand as God's watchmen on the walls of Zion be men who can see the dangers before the people. And so again, God is wanting all of us to be watchmen on the wall of Zion. And the reason for this is because we need to be able to see the dangers that are before the people. Men who can distinguish between truth and error, righteousness and unrighteousness. This is fundamental. We need to be able to distinguish between truth and error. When things are presented to us, we must, watchmen, know when error is trying to come in. The warning, and we are the majority of the quotes that we're going through, you're going to be familiar with. Most of us here are going to be familiar with these quotes. And so we're reviewing these quotes because these quotes have been used in a way that has they have been given a different interpretation. And so we need to clarify some things about these quotes. And we need to make the connections in relation to the quotes. The warning has come. Nothing is to be allowed to come in that will disturb the foundation of the faith. And so notice the watchmen are to not allow things to come in that will disturb the foundation of the faith. And so what is the foundation of the faith upon which we have been building ever since the message came in 1842, 1843, and 1844? He continues to say, I was in this message, and ever since I have been standing before the world, true to the light that God has given us. We do not propose to take our feet off the platform on which they were placed, as day by day we sought the Lord with earnest prayer, seeking for light. And so before I continue and complete this part of the quote, they were building they were building upon uh, this structure, if you will. When did they begin to build this? She gives the years 1842, 1843, and 1844. And so they are building this structure, and she says that their feet were placed upon the platform upon which they were placed, as day by day we sought the Lord with earnest prayer, seeking for light. And so when did this take place? She gives us the years that years of 1842, 1843, and 1844. And of course, after the Great Disappointment, we know that there was a little faithful group that were able to continue to study, to see what was the mistake, what was the reason for their great disappointment, right? But they have a platform, they have a structure, they have something to stand upon, and that was the messages given in 1842, 1843, and 1844. Vital. This is vital information, because if the platform was erected at this time, then anything and everything that was given to them needs to be considered. None of it should be done away with. And then she continues, do you think that I could give up the light that God has given me? It is to be as the rock of ages. Okay, so that platform, she is comparing it to Christ himself. These messages, these foundational messages that were given in 1842, 1843, and 1844 are to be as the rock of ages. And so that question, that rhetorical question that she presents, do you think that I could give up the light that God has given me? It's an obvious no. It is to be that platform, that truth that came in during these years. It is to be as the rock of ages. And so when people come to us and say, well, no, that 2520, that was done away with. Well, that's not what she's saying here. She's not saying that at all. She's saying that that truth, along with the other truths, everything dealing with the prophetic periods, are to be as the rock of ages. And so those arguments, those silly arguments that are presented to us, are totally contrary to the Spirit of God, as we can see clearly in this quotation. It has been guiding me. What has been guiding her? The truths presented in those years. It has been guiding me ever since it was given. Brethren and sisters, God lives and reigns and works today. His hand is on the will. We'll pause here. What is Mr. White referring to here? His hand is on the wheel. Well, this brings us back to last with Brother Dean's presentation. This is the ship. This is that vessel. He is steering the wheel to that ship. Okay. And so hopefully we're able to see now where this is leading us. Okay. We'll see things like this throughout the various quotations that we will be reading. Okay. Here she's introducing the ship. And who's at the wheel? It's Christ. His hand is on the wheel. And in his providence, providence has a big part to play in God's ways of speaking to us and guiding us. His providence, he is turning the wheel in accordance with his own will. Let not men fasten themselves to documents saying they will do and what they will not do. Let them fasten themselves to the Lord God of heaven. Then the light of heaven will shine into the soul temple, and we shall see the salvation of God. And so, any documents coming in that do away without the foundational teachings of the first, second angel, these are not to be considered as truth. Because anything that does away with that truth is doing away with the foundation that God has given us. It's doing away with the rock of ages. God has identified in this quote what the rock of ages is to us. It is the first and second angel's message. And so let us continue. The heavenly messenger says, okay, so notice what the heavenly messenger says here. How could you allow yourselves to be led blindfold? How could you so represent the name you bear? You have your Bibles. Why have you not reasoned from cause to effect? You have accepted theories that have led you away from the truths that are to stamp their impress upon the characters of all Seventh-day Adventists. Your leader has been removing the foundation timbers one by one. And so here again, we're going back to the ship, right? The ship, the foundation of that ship was being removed. The timbers were being removed from it. Okay, and so this controversy is, we all know what it's dealing with. It's dealing with Kellogg and his pantheistic views, later became Trinitarian, the alpha and omega of deadly heresies. Okay, and so he was doing what? He was removing the timbers from the ship. Your leader has been removing the foundation timbers, the foundation, one by one. And his reasoning would soon leave us with no certain foundation for our faith. He has not heeded the testimonies that God, through his Spirit, has given. The books of the Bible containing most important instruction are disregarded because they say so much about a personal God. And so this is very interesting because we know that Kellogg was removing the true understanding of the personality of God through his heathenistic beliefs that God was able to be everywhere at the same time, that he was more of an essence, right? And so he's being depicted here as removing the foundational timbers of that boat, of that ship, of that vessel. That's very interesting because most people, when they present this, they present it as the foundation being the personality of God and of Christ. And to a certain degree, that is true. But we just in the other quotation that the very bottom of that foundation, the rock of ages, it has to do with the teachings that were given in 1842, 1843, and 1844. And we shall see other years that are actually added to that time period. But he was not uh, directly attacking those truths, but he was going to that direction, if I can put it in those terms. He was headed towards that. He was dealing with the messages that God gave to his people after the great disappointment. This is where the personality of God and of Christ was revealed to them when they entered into that most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary. This is where the personality of Christ as mediator and high priest was clearly revealed to them. And of course, the Father was there as well. This is why we see those visions after the great disappointment given to Miss White. After the 2,300 days, we have that vision about Christ moving into the most holy place. Satan uh, seems to be taking his place in the holy place. You all remember that. And so here we can see that Kellogg definitely removing timbers of the foundation, right? But he was moving in the direction towards where he would, at some point or another, removing the whole foundation, even the rock of ages, going in that direction. By removing any part of the foundation, you end up disturbing the rest. And so notice what it continues to say. He has not known whether his feet were tending, but in his recent writings, his tendencies towards pantheism have been revealed. The enemy of souls has brought to bring in the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith and engaging in a process of reorganization. And so when people read this, the first 63, because it's talking about a reorganization. But we need to be able to correlate each and every one of the quotes that are speaking about the same thing. We have to use Miller's rules here, okay, in order to have the correct perspective, the correct understanding of what she's actually saying. God organizes people through the teachings that he gave them. What are the teachings? The teachings of the first, second, and third angel's message. This is how God organized them. This was the mission of every Seventh-day Adventist, correct? And so here, she's referring to a time when the enemy of souls would bring about the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines. See, notice the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith. and engaging in the process of reorganization, we are where this information to take place, what would result? The principles of truth that God in his wisdom, the remnant church, would be discarded. Our religion would be changed. The fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as error. A new organization would be. And so there's quite a few things here to notice, but the main thing here is that the reorganization that is being brought about, or that has been brought about because she actually predicted that this would happen, was the removal of the foundational teachings. The foundational teachings. Okay. And so when we look at what are the things that the new organization has changed, well, most people recognize right away that the Trinity was implemented in 19. But is that all? No, it is not all. It also has to do with the foundational teachings going back to as far back as 1842, 1843, and 1844. We no longer, or they no longer, let's put it that way, because we hold to these truths. And this, our protest against them, is that they are no longer looking at the whole truth as it was given by our pioneers, namely Miller and his associates. They have also done away with a good amount of prophetic periods, right? They stick to the 2300 days, 70 weeks, 1260, and they're fine with that. But this is not what the Lord is telling us through his messenger. His messenger is saying that all of the truths should be sustained as we continue to read. We are to continue to hold those truths in a very with a very strong grip. Notice as we continue. And so this new organization is the removal of the original beliefs of our pioneers, going as far back as the 1840s. The leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation would be built upon the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. And so this is very interesting because when you remove God, you remove everything. Everything that God has built through these messages, right? Is kind of the same principle that we find in the book of James, where he says, if you offend in one point of the law, you are guilty of all. So likewise, in the first and second and third angel's message, if you remove any part, especially the truth about God, you have done away with the whole thing. In another quote, uh, we're all familiar with it. She says, "Not a pen or a peg should be tampered with." Okay, I'm paraphrasing there. It might not be exactly that, but you get the idea. You can't even move a pen. And that is a very small part of the structure. A mind trained only in worldly science fails to discern the deep things of God. But the same mind, converted and sanctified, would see the divine power in the Word. Only the mind that is cleansed by the sanctification of the Spirit can discern heavenly things. And so at times we're trying to explain these things to other individuals, and for some reason or another, they are not able to see it. Well, according to God, it's because there is no, there's a need of conversion, right? And God sanctifies us through His Word. God can see our heart. He can see how our motives, our desires, if we truly want to know this, right? And this is the issue that most of us have in Laodicea, right? We are not able to see. We need eyesight, and so it's because conversion is needed. I am instructed to say that those who would tear away the foundation that God has laid are not to be accepted as teachers and leaders of His people. And so, if there's anyone that we are listening to that is not teaching this, you can be sure that that person will influence you away from the truths that God has been teaching us. We are to hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast. Okay, notice how she's making it very the emphasis being made that steadfast. This is the way we are to hold to the beginning of our confidence. And she's talking about the beginning of the confidence is not when they organized in 1863. That is not the beginning of our confidence. The beginning of our confidence was back in the 1840s. She says we are to hold to the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto the end. Words of power have been sent by God and by Christ to His people, to this people, bringing them out from the world point by point into the clear light of present truth. And so, going all the way back, the first angel's message, all of those different prophetic periods are to do exactly that. They are to bring us out from the world. Is that not what we saw when people rejected the first angel's message? What the second angel, Babylon has fallen, right? They were out of those churches, out of the world, if you will. And then we see point by point into the clear light of present truths. That's they received more light as they accepted the light that God was offering each and every one of them. This is how God teaches us through the advancement of the messages. The Lord calls for a renewal of the straight testimony born in years past. He calls for a revival of spiritual life. The spiritual energies of His people have long been torpid, but, and here's the good news, but there will be a resurrection from the apparent death. And this was our condition we knew we knew about the original teaching, before we knew about the first, second, and third angel's message. We were basically dead. And so this should bring back to Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones. There will be a resurrection from that death. And that's what God is doing under the fourth angel's message. He has brought, he has unlocked those truths that were hidden in the rubbish of error. Okay. And so notice the year here, 1903. We did read a verse or a quote, excuse me, where she said, for the past 50 years. And we're going to see this in some of these quotes where she is dealing with the Kellogg controversy, right? For the past 50 years, if you do the math, 1903 minus 50, you end up at 1853. in 1853. What happened around that time? Well, we know that in 1850, Otis Nichols devised a chart. He devised a chart. This was the 1850 chart. And this was the complementary chart to the 1843. What were the truths that were on that chart? Well, we know that the 2520 is on the bottom part of that chart. They still held on to the prophetic periods. They still held on to the phase that they received in those early years, 1843, 1844. We see that God is calling them back and has been doing that through the testimonies uh, of the Spirit. Excuse me. We must be able to say, in storm and tempest, my anchor holds. It's going to be important for us to remember those words. My anchor holds. He who builds upon another foundation than that which has been laid builds upon shifting sand. God calls for a reformation, but he who seeks to bring about a reformation without the aid of the Holy Spirit's reviving power will find himself adrift. And so notice adrift without anchor, right? And we're back to the analogy of a ship, a vessel, where Christ is the one at the wheel. Well, being in a ship without anchor, you end up adrift, and that is very dangerous. Many saw the perfect chain of truth in the angel's messages. Okay, this is early writings. That perfect chain of truth didn't begin in October 22nd, 1844. That perfect chain of truth was given to William Miller, and William Miller was very instrumental in giving the first angel's message, which included 25 7 times of the Gentiles, and that truth is the beginning of the perfect chain of truth. Okay? And so here under the third angel's message, the perfect chain of truth in the angel's messages, and gladly receive them in their order. And he saw this and accepted it and received it. How? In their order. It's very important that we give the messages in this fashion and follow Jesus by faith into the heavenly sanctuary. These messages were represented to me as an anchor. Notice the anchor, right? My anchor holds to the people of God, those who understand and receive them will be kept from being swept away by the many delusions of Satan. Okay? And so if we're not holding to this anchor, when the time comes, we will be swept away by the many delusions of Satan. The analogy remains. There is a ship, there is a vessel that we should be on, and we need to make sure that we are on the right one. Shortly before I sent out the testimonies regarding the efforts of the enemy to undermine the foundation of our faith through the dissemination of seductive theories, back to the Kellogg controversy, as you can see, I had read an incident about a ship in a fog meeting an iceberg. For several nights, I slept but little. I seemed to be bowed down as a cart beneath sheaves. That's a very interesting illustration of how she felt, being weighed down by, we need to picture a cart that's being weighed down by sheaves. Only a farmer would really appreciate that. One night, a scene was clearly presented before me. A vessel was upon the waters in a heavy fog. Suddenly, the lookout cried, "Iceberg just ahead!" There, towering high above the ship, was a gigantic iceberg. An authoritative voice cried out, "Meet it!" Well, I knew the meaning of this representation. So again, this ship, this vessel, is a representation. It's and Brother Dean clearly showed us how this representation is to be unlocked. It was Testimonies Volume 5, where he found the answer to the other quote. And here we're seeing how this ship keeps being brought up in relation to the foundational teachings that God has given us. I had my orders. I had heard the words like a voice from our captain. The captain is Christ. He's the one at the wheel. Meet it. I knew what my duty was and that there was not a moment to lose. The time for decided action had come. I must without delay obey the command, meet it. Now notice this, many of our people do not realize how firmly the foundation of our faith has been laid. Okay? So many people don't realize this today, correct? This is all in relation to what's going on with Kellogg and the Kellogg crisis. The reason why this was happening was because they were forgetting about that foundation, about how it was laid, when it was laid. Who were they? Who were those that laid that foundation? My husband, Elder Joseph Bates, Father Pierce, Elder Hiram Edson, and others who were keen, noble, who were among those who, after the passing of the time in 1844, searched for the truth as for hidden treasure. But one thing to note about each and every one of these pioneers is that they were all pioneers that were a part of the early movement of the first and second angel's message. These were they that held on to those truths. And even though Miss White's husband, James White, at some point would end up printing an article against the Seven Times, we know that that article was dealt with by the pioneers of the first angel's message. Apollos Hill's book, right? He dealt with those uh, arguments, put it to bed very clearly. Now, but yet it took him some time to end up printing that article because in 1850 again, which he was a part of the movement at the time. And by that time, they are Seventh-day Adventist. They didn't have the name as an organization, but they were keeping the Sabbath already by 1850. And so it continues again and again. These brethren came together to study the Bible. It's important to note that they were studying the Bible in order that they might know its meaning and be prepared to teach it with power. When they came to a point or to the point in their study where they said, "We can nothing more," the Spirit of the Lord would come upon me. I would be taken off in vision, and a clear explanation of the passages we had been studying would be given me, with instruction as to how we were to labor and teach effectively. Okay, and so This was during the time that was called the Sabbath and sanctuary meetings. Okay, this is where this happened. This was after the Great Disappointment. We see that there is a small group, about 50, that continued to study. They continued to study the why they were disappointed. Why did these things happen? Well, in those meetings, we see the testimony of Jesus speaking through Mrs. White, and he is there to give them the explanation of the passages that they had been studying with the instructions on how to labor and teach effectively. This is the reason why we use the spirit of prophecy. We know that in giving Bible studies, we don't start with Miss White's writings. We always lead people to the Bible. But that's not to say that we are not to use her writings at all, right? And I think there's nobody here on this uh, group that believes otherwise. We all believe that she was the Lord's messenger. But it's important to note that there are things found in her writings that will explain to us what is meant by certain passages in the Bible. We can use the same way that God used her in these Sabbath and sanctuary meetings. We have all of this instruction by God's grace. What influence is it would lead man at this stage of history to work in a underhand, powerful way to tear down the foundation of our faith, the foundation that was laid at the beginning of our work by prayerful study of the Word and by revelation. Upon this foundation, we have been building for the past 50 years. Notice again, the past 50 years. It goes way back than the time that most people want to accept, right? They take it to 1863. This is where the fundamental principles were laid out and try to use that as a creed to show that this is what all Seventh-day Adventists believe. No, that's not the truth when it comes down to what we're reading. It takes us back closer to the years 1850. And 1850, very important date because of the complementary chart by Nichols, completing the prophecy of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, the uh, truths made plain upon tables. Do you wonder that when I see the beginning of a work that would remove some of the pillars of our faith, I would have something to say? I must obey the command, meet it. Okay, and so that's exactly what she was doing. She was defending the truths of the foundation of the faith, the first, second, and third angels' messages. I must bear the messages of warning that God gives me to bear, and then leave with the results. I must now present the matter in all its bearings, for the people of God must not be despoiled. Which that is, we shouldn't have the truth stripped away from us. The foundation should continue. We are God's commandment keeping people for the past 50 years. Again, every phase of heresy, how many? Every phase of heresy has been brought to bear upon us. They dealt with each and every heresy that is presented to us, brothers and sisters. And so, since they had the experience, God is calling us to go through their writings, to look at how they dealt with these things. They had wisdom. God gave them the wisdom to disregard those things. It says, for the past 50 years, every phase of heresy has been brought to bear upon us to becloud our minds regarding the teaching of the word, especially concerning the ministration of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary and the message of heaven for the last days. And so, what's that message of heaven for the last days? As given by the angels of the 14th chapter of Revelation. Okay? And so, when you attack any part of that message, you attack the whole thing. You can't just attack one without it affecting the whole messages. But the waymarks which have made us what we are to be preserved. What are the waymarks? We shall see here in a bit. And they will be preserved. God, through Miss White, predicted this is uh, a prophetic announcement, and they will be preserved as God has signified through his word and the testimony of the Spirit, as the writings of the prophets and the writings of the Lord's messenger. He calls upon us to hold firmly with the grip of faith. Okay, so this is why our faith needs to be strong. We only do this by taking the time to study these things out for ourselves, by doing our own investigation to the fundamental principles that are based upon unquestionable authority. And again, these quotes are not being interpreted as they should. Okay, people want to use this quote to uh, tie it together to the fundamental principles given in 1863. The unquestionable uh, authority that God has given to us has been presented in the slides that I am showing you today. It is the rock of ages. It is the foundational teachings of the first and second and third messages. Okay, it's the whole thing, not just a small part, not just the 2,300 days, not just the 1260, and it's definitely not just the one true God uh, truth, or the Father and Son truth. It is not that in itself. It is a whole package. God has given us the whole thing, and these are principles that are based upon unquestionable authority. That is the true interpretation according to the context, according to the other quotes that we have read up till now. This is all referring to the same foundation. Not that God has a foundation here and a foundation there and five, six, seven foundations. It's one foundation. Each and every one of the teachings are built upon that foundation. And if you remove any part of that foundation, you will destroy the whole thing. It will all come down. But according to what we just read, God will preserve them, and He has preserved them, as we have been seeing every Sabbath that we come together. Uh, these truths continue to be truth for us today, and we shall see this. Now, I did ask a question. You remember we read about the waymarks? So I asked Gemini this question. This is the AI. And I'm thinking that Gemini is starting to get to know because I asked questions in regards to the pioneer truth, okay? He's kind of getting my algorithm going. In Adventism, what would be considered the waymarks? This is what Gemini responds. In Seventh-day Adventist theology, waymarks refer to specific unchangeable. I really appreciated this. Unchangeable historical events and biblical prophecies that established the movement. And so, what are those prophecies that are unchangeable? What are these historical events and biblical prophecies that establish the movement? The first, second, and third angel's message. They are viewed as mileposts. The fulfillment of those prophecies are considered to be mileposts on the path to the second coming of Christ, providing assurance that the movement is on the right track. Okay. And so, how do we know we're on the right track, brothers and sisters? It is by knowing what the first, second, and third angel message are. They are the foundation. Okay. And you can't have one without the other. They must come in as a package deal. Notice the verse that Gemini gave me. The concept is rooted in Jeremiah 31:21. Set thee up waymarks, make thee high heaps, set thine heart toward the highway. And so this should remind us of uh, Joseph Bates. He actually wrote a book called Waymarks and High Heaps, and he actually explains what those truths are. And when he wrote that book, this was after the disappointment. Okay, so that way we all um, are aware. I haven't read the whole book myself, but uh, it would be good to go through it every now and then. There are important truths that that are written there, referring to the waymarks and high heaps that God provided for us, so that we would know that we are definitely on the right track. And so, let's get a good picture of this. This is Brother Maitreya's chart. Here are the waymarks and high heaps. Okay, these are uh, the indicators, the mileposts along the way that identify who we are. Sure, you are all familiar with it, but notice here towards the end, at the time of the end, 1798 and onward, I believe these are the ones uh, that give us the understanding, and they identify where we need to acknowledge what our pioneers went through. Okay, from 1798 all the way down to 1848 are some very important events. Now, before 1810, but after 1844, we see that uh, there is the sealing message that was provided to our pioneers in 1848. That would be another event that we would add, and it would come down to 11 waymarks for us to identify where we are in the truths that we need to understand that establish us as a people at this time. Science and history cannot of themselves make men wise unto salvation. And so, science and history, they're very important things to look at, but they are alone not able to make us wise unto salvation. But through the aid of the Holy Spirit, which in answer to prayer will be given to guide into all truth, science and history may be made use of as clear and definite light. And so, what this quotation here is saying is that we can know about science and history, but Without the aid of the Holy Spirit, that science and history can do nothing for us spiritually, right? But once we invite God in guiding us into those things, whether it be science or history, then that science or history can be used as clear and definite light, blend with that of the written, inspired word. And so, when every time we use history, we always use it as the fulfillment of prophecy, and this is where we see light given through the prophecies of the Bible. There are lessons to be learned from the history of the past, and attention is called to these, that all may understand that God works on the same lines now that he has done. His hand is seen in his work and among the nations now. And so, going back to that update that Brother Dean gave us, we can see God's hand working among the nations now. Just the same as it has ever been, it has been ever since the gospel was first proclaimed to Adam and Eve. And so, going as far back as creation, when Adam was instructed about the gospel, all the way down to our time, God has ever given us that same way he works throughout the nations. There are periods, this is a very familiar one to us. Notice there are periods which are turning points in the history of nations and of the church. In the providence of God, again, the providence of God is referred to again. When these different crises arrive, the light for that time is given. If it is received, there is spiritual progress. If it is rejected, spiritual declension and shipwreck follow. And so here we are emphasizing the last part of the quote, shipwreck follow. Again, it's referring to those vessels that and this is the analogy, right? That there are vessels that will be shipwrecked because of the rejection of the truth for the time. The Lord in his word has opened up the aggressive work of the gospel as it has been carried on in the past and will be in the future, even to the closing conflict when satanic agencies will make their last wonderful movement. From that word, we understand that the forces are now at work and that will usher in the last great conflict between good and evil, between Satan, the prince of darkness, and Christ, the prince of light. But the coming triumph for the men who love and fear is as sure as his throne is established in the heavens. And this is also a prophecy that the Lord has given us through the testimony of Jesus, where we are assured that if we hold on to the beginning of our confidence, to the foundational teachings of Seventh-day Adventist movement, we shall triumph as God leads and directs us in the path uh, that we will trod here shortly.